Want to take you back to this live image we have showing the Israel-Lebanon border as we get to the latest out of the Middle East. Israel now saying that 50 tunnels leading from Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, have been found, and they are leading over to Egypt. The Foundation for Defensive Democracy is reporting that Israeli attorney Gilad Noam told the International Court of Justice that nearly 700 tunnel shafts have been identified in Rafah, and about 50 of them cross into Egypt. Noam saying that Hamas uses the tunnels to supply itself with weapons and ammo and could even use them to smuggle hostages out of Gaza. I do want to talk more about that and the other developments out of the Middle East, so let's bring in a friend of the show here, Dr. Asaf Romarowski, the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you for having me, as always.
So what do you make of that information there? 700 tunnels found underneath Rafah, according to Israel, and 50 of them leading into Egypt. That sounds like a fairly significant number.
It is, and it's worth noting all around. This is really where the veil has been lifted. The Israelis have been arguing for a very long time that there has been no pressure on the Egyptians. I mean, really, there has been with arming and supplying Hamas all along. The aid, the training, as you mentioned, the smuggling is continuing to go from and to Egypt and back and forth. And Egypt continues to turn a blind eye while trying to pivot and argue that all the pressure is on the Israelis. As you noted from our past conversations, they have refused to take in any kind of the civilian population into Egypt. They want to contain it within Israel, while they have been complacent with making sure Hamas is continuously armed, is allowed to use in their tunnels, their air, and their land in order to keep sure they're in office. So really, they are maintaining the Muslim Brotherhood, which they are, of course, an enemy of Egypt, but they're allowing them to operate freely. The bigger, of course, concern is that smuggling of the hostages through Egypt, and of course maintaining them there, that's also harboring of the allowing the terrorists to operate freely while holding American and Israeli citizens in potentially Egyptian territory. These are all part of the concerns and damning evidence that we should put pressure on the Israelis. The White House has been putting a lot of pressure on Israel and really trying to hold Israel back as far as a full military operation. Why isn't there no pressure on the Egyptians to actually to collaborate and to work with the Israelis and to really fight against Hamas if they say, like they say, they've been saying on record, that Hamas and the Brotherhood are sworn enemies of them. And that's part of the problem, I think, that we need to put, or not forget that there is another side to this border. So far, all the pressure is on Israel, but the Egyptians need to collaborate. And I would like to see, we need to see more pressure coming in from the White House and from other partners in the region on the Egyptians.
And a sad update that we did get from the IDF about 24 hours ago. They said they recovered the bodies of 3 more hostages. So my question for you, does this lead to even more, I guess, concerns over the conditions of the remaining hostages who do still remain there in Gaza?
Indeed, it does. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the whereabouts of the bodies of the latest 3 Israelis was due to intelligence, due to the interrogation that Israel has been interrogating Hamas members in the area. So that's also worthy of note in the sense that Israel is really, putting the screws on the Egyptians and on Hamas, the fact that they are finding and they know where the intelligence and where the arm is as far as going in. Shani Luke in particular is worth mentioning. You might remember that at the beginning of the war, after October 7th, her body was featured in many of the videos that Hamas took in the GoPro footage when they went after the attack in the barbaric way in the Nova Festival. I think that this is putting pressure, indeed, that Israel is indeed committed to bringing back the hostages, dead or alive. It's also showing, of course, that the more Hamas uses these individuals as pawns and Israel is able to get them on their own, they're taking away more and more of that pressure on the Israelis, so allowing the Israelis to continue the military operation while at the same time trying to do whatever they can to bring back civilians home back to their families. Unfortunately, the tragedy of bringing back dead bodies, these are indeed all part of the tragedy of the war that we've been seeing since October 7th.
Some Israeli officials there have said that they are concerned that going into Rafah, doing this full-scale operation rather than the, I guess, smaller operations that have been conducted so far, could potentially put those remaining hostages who are alive in danger. So my question for you, what do you make of those comments?
It is indeed a concern. I mean, the fact of the matter is now that we know, and this was all the speculation and the intelligence all along, that the Hamas is able to get into Egypt. And most likely the Hamas leadership, Sinwar and Diaf and others, have surrounding themselves with the remaining hostages. That's their lifeline, that's their life insurance, with the idea of using them as pawns, and this is really what the tragedy and the horrific acts of the war and how this has all been played out. So that's a main concern. The concern for the Israelis has been all along, and this has been the delicate balance that they've been straddling with since the beginning of the war, is how to win the war, eradicate Hamas, ensuring the fact that Hamas is entirely out of the picture in any way, shape, or form, and marginalize and getting them really to eradicate them as far as possible from the Gaza Strip. But on the other hand, doing the best they can to save their own citizens. And that's been the ongoing balance. And to your point before, the Israelis have not launched a full-scale operation in Rafah, though the evidence, I would argue, justifies that, given what we found with the Egyptians. But they are taking out surgical attacks in order to make sure that they are gathering intel, trying to get as much information with the Hamas prisoners that they've captured on the whereabouts of the hostages, and at the same time conducting the war. And third, no less important, as you mentioned before in the coverage by the Israeli spokesman Daniel Hagari, is getting in aid while at the same time trying to disentangle the civilian population from Hamas. This is all part of the challenges that we've seen all along while you're conducting a very delicate urban warfare in this very highly densely populated area.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is going to be in Israel tomorrow. He's expected to arrive there and to meet with high-ranking Israeli officials. What message is the U.S. likely trying to send? Is this all still likely related to that full-scale Rafah operation?
I think it is. I think that the United States, though, realizes that the Israeli objectives are very clear. I mean, it should be very clear and noted that Israel is fighting, Israel's enemies are our enemies. And whatever, none of this war is contained to the Middle East. And clearly it's bleeding into our American college campuses that we've seen with the encampment as far as the voices. Iran is pulling the strings in all of this. This is all part of the larger Iranian axis in the region at large. I think that there is a little bit more of a dose of reality given the comments that have come out of the leadership of Israel, that Israel will continue this war one way or another. It's important also to be very clear that anything short of the total removal of Hamas is a failure for the state of Israel. They can't afford to do that. That is a commitment they made to all their citizens since the beginning of the war. And until they are able to restore some kind of deterrence and some kind of safety and security in the southern part of Israel, this will not stop. And I think the White House is aware of that, given the damning intel we're seeing that, but there's still a amount of pressure to try to temper it down, trying to say that, again, trying to use and leverage the hostages and trying to put pressure on the brokerage, especially with regard to Egypt. And maybe there could be some chances of bringing back as many live hostages as possible, especially when it comes to the women and children and the elderly. But we don't know. But that's part of the game of the diplomacy that Washington is still playing with the Israelis, even on the heels of the discovery of all this damning intel as it relates to Egypt's complacency while allowing Hamas to thrive, really.
What you're looking at right now is a live look at the Israel-Lebanon border. So I want to talk a little bit about Hezbollah here because we've seen the fighting over the past several months there. On Friday, I believe it was about 75 rockets that Israel says were fired there over at northern Israel, most of them intercepted by the Iron Dome, but 2 people injured as a result at least. My question for you, does it appear that the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah is intensifying, or has it pretty much been like this over the past several months?
I think we're seeing a little bit more of ratcheting it up ever since Iran attacked Israel. Clearly, it's also worthy of note that the Hezbollah has long-range capabilities and are able to, and the targets that they are choosing are indeed guidance missiles that they have capability as far as going after Israeli radars. This is Iran. Hezbollah is a trained and a well-armed military funded by the Iranians. The Israelis have been taking out field commanders and other kind of leaders along the way related to Iran and to Hezbollah, but they are being replaced. And what Hezbollah is proving and what they are looking for is, of course, to start a war on 2 fronts. There's been a war on 2 fronts all along, but are trying to put more pressure on the Israelis, taking their marching orders from the direct patron from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The fact that they have the long-range missiles, these are real concerns for the Israelis. Whether or not they're going to be able to start moving in troops into the northern part of Israel is a question. So far, the retaliations has been through the use of the Israeli Air Force. But if this continues, we will see more pressure to put more potentially boots on the ground. The concern, of course, all along has been putting on pressure on 2 ends. That, I'm sure, will be part of the conversation as Sullivan comes to the region as it relates to going into Lebanon. This is, again, a very different scenario in the sense that you're going after a state actor versus a non-state actor related to Gaza. And so that, of course, is another changing of what's been happening in the larger space regarding all of this. And the question is the United States going to add any more pressure related to firing back, getting involved, engaged more, especially when it comes to rockets coming in from the north? Again, we don't know those issues, but I'm sure they're part of the bargaining chips that are going to be discussed in the next few days.
All right, Dr. Asaf Romarowski, as always, thank you so much for being here with us. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
I think we're good, but I'm sure obviously things are fluid and will be developing as all of this progresses. And we will seeing a lot more changes as things evolve, as always in the Middle East.
All right. Thank you again for being here with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.